Hello, everybody. Very happy to be here today to share some of the findings and takeaway from the report. This is a joint effort by the Internal Audit Foundation and the Audit Board, and a very relevant topic, the remote auditor. We're going to talk about some challenges, some opportunities, some takeaways of how you can be better as a remote auditor, and we're going to talk through different topics. So again, this was the report that used a lot of surveys. So it was a lot of LinkedIn surveys, other specific standalone surveys that were conducted to collect some of the data. Hopefully you'll find some of them resonate with what you're seeing, maybe some surprises for some of you, but this is what we're here for, is to really share and learn. Well, let's talk about the good things that come with the remote audit. So there are certainly advantages, right? With any change, which could be more painful or less painful for, depending on your staff and your organizations, there's always some advantages, right? So let's just talk about a few of them, and I'm sure there's more that you came across, and some may not be applicable to everybody, but this is based on another research and study that was done by Internal Audit Foundation. So this is a kind of a cumulative results and some of the examples that many people shared. Expanded pool of available auditors and subject matter experts, right? So if you're not necessarily stuck to one location, you can expand your coverage, right? You can bring your subject matter experts that are not necessarily in the same location, and they may have more availability because they can be working on a few clients or a few engagements at the same time, but yet you still get advantage of having that expertise when you need it by working remotely. Expanded coverage, travel limitations are kind of off the table, so you really are virtual, so you have a lot of opportunities, and that comes with reduced travel costs. So if you had budget limitations in terms of travel, now you can accomplish more than you ever could. The burden to the audit customers is less, right? Because you can give them more time, to prepare information. You don't have a lot of auditors on site, so it feels lighter to a certain extent. At the same time, documentation could also be easily obtained, but we're going to talk about this. It could be going both directions. But organization of the documentation information, if you're using a tool, information is centrally available. And again, you reduce some of the duplication of effort. If you have external auditors that are looking for the same information, you can have one repository that can be accessed by all auditors. So again, less questions, less requests from your auditors on the audit customers. And this is really, really going a long way, speaking of building relationships. Well, there's some limitations that we may have as we are covering our audit plans remotely. And I think this is the area that comes up a lot, is the first-hand observations, right? Can I always replace in-person observations with virtual? And the answer is not always, right? Because, depending on what exactly you need to do, right? Yes, there are cameras, there could be mobile devices, you can use conference calls. So let's take example of physical inventories, physical observations. So it sounds pretty simple, right? Okay, so I'm going to replace my in-person auditor with somebody at the location who's going to be walking around with a cell phone, right? We will do FaceTime, or we'll do Teams meeting, and they'll walk around. So it sounds pretty easy, but then you start walking around and you realize that you have reception issues, you have dead spots at that warehouse or whatever that place is. How do you overcome that? Are you able to achieve your audit objectives? Are you able to observe what you typically would observe on site? Another example, do you know that the person who is walking around with that device is showing you everything you really want to see? Are there some spots that they really want you to avoid and not be able to see? You can't really fully control that, right? So that's just a couple of examples of some limitations that we have with the virtual observations. However, I would say with the right preparation and the right testing, you should be able to achieve at least most of your objectives, if not all of your objectives. And in this case, again, I would say work with the location in advance. Don't test your technology for the first time when you have to do your observations, right? Set aside time, make sure testing goes well. If you identify some challenges, at least you have time to figure out plan B, or work with your IT team to figure out what could be fixed. Could be blind spots, could be putting some extenders in the warehouse or whatever else, you may have to work with. But, allow yourself more planning for that, more planning and more testing so that your day off is successful and you don't have to deal with any technological challenges like you would experience in planning. Building relationships, right? Remote auditing makes it hard to build rapport with auditees. It's true, right? It's not the same as being in person. Being in person, you still have your informal conversations. People still get to know you, and you can kind of connect on a personal level a little bit more versus having virtual meetings where typically people like to stick with what their agenda says, right? Or needing some specific information and really not willing to have chit chat with you too much, right? But the second drawback of virtual is really not being able to provide some of the value add tips and recommendations. You may be focused on one audit area, but as you're on site, you may see some other opportunities that you may have seen at other locations, or you just from your experience may want to share and recommend how to do things better, right? So we're kind of losing that element of additional value add recommendations that are not even necessarily part of your audit scope or work, but could be really helpful to the auditees. And this typically is what really gives us that strong bond, relationship, and not being taken as just auditors who are here to do their scope and they don't really care about my work versus, somebody like who came and said, oh, you know what, they actually did their work, but they also gave me some really good recommendations. And not to forget about opportunities for fraud, right? Again, lack of on-site presence potentially opens up more opportunities for fraud. If people know nobody's watching, right? The fraud triangle. If opportunity is there and nobody is looking, obviously there's higher chance of, something going wrong. So enough about the negative. Let's talk about some of the considerations now that we're, based on the surveys, mostly doing either fully remote or hybrid. Again, only small percent return back in person and performing their audits in person. So thinking about the remote considerations, right? What should we be changing? What should we be thinking about as we plan our remote audits? And again, these are some of the examples, some of the considerations that were published in the white paper. I think we have a resource link here. If not, we can share it with you guys later. It's a remote auditing for COVID-19 and beyond by Roy Litzenberg and Carrie Ramirez. So again, they've done a lot of research and pulled together information from various sources, from various leaders. So just kind of thinking about the audit cycle, right? We have typical, right? This is really your kind of typical approach with the mindset of remote, right? So you have a planning session. So you really need to allocate more time to plan, right? Planning is very important in general, but when you have the remote auditing, really think through all the elements. What are the limitations of the remote audit? What do you need to let your stakeholders know? What is different? What is the difference between being on-site in person versus remote audit? So your auditees need to really understand what that means to them, especially it's the first time of them being audited remotely. What does it mean? What do you guys need? Are you still coming on site? How can we provide you information? Is it changing the timeline? How many auditors are going to be involved? And this really changed for us. We used to have a group of people going at the plants as an example, and now that we have opportunity to work remotely, people work on multiple different areas at the same time. So you may actually have more people be working on the audit, but some targeted areas, or vice versa. You may be, some audits could be less people than traditionally. So you have ability to kind of mix and match, but you have to really explain to your audit customer what it really means to them. Are their traditional expectations changing? Is the timeline of the audit going to change? What is really going to happen to, and the more answers you provide up front, the easier it's going to be to conduct the audit. And then talk about the technology use. What has changed again from last time you've been at that location. If it's historically been done on site, explain the technology use. So in our case, we did adopt the technology and we automated the documentation requests and a lot of different aspects that our audit customers have not had to deal with before. So we made sure we provided training so that they know what the expectation is. They know where they should be uploading the information, and the process goes way smoother this way. So document review, right? So again, thinking about that aspect that you don't always necessarily think about as you request something. It does take longer to provide some of the documentation electronically, especially if you're a very much paper-based support type organization, right? If you're in an environment that historically has been automated, electronic, probably not as much of a shift. If you are, however, kind of an old school company where you have a lot of documentation, think about how long it's going to take to scan certain information, right? Especially if it's multiple pages, double-sided, and maybe not the format that's easily scanned. It does create an extra burden on your auditees. It's definitely something that you should allow for more time and really be humble and really be appreciative of your request, because it is something that is going to take them longer to do. And you have to really be thankful and appreciative, just to kind of, again, speaking of that building relationship piece, be open to a different format of information that you're used to, right? Again, as long as you get what you need, just be prepared to have slightly different versions of this information. Maybe soft copy may not be exactly what you're used to be seeing. Maybe they've changed their ways of performing certain controls. I mean, ideally, if you're dealing with the controls, SOX controls, that should be addressed during your designs. But if it's operational audit, that some things may be coming up as you are covering your specific areas of planning and requesting documentation. So it's really kind of that flexibility that we're also going to talk about that you need to have. Really thinking about how are you going to look at the data? How are you going to review the data? And again, this is the opportunity to rethink your audit approach and data review for some of the information that you may have. Okay, site visits. We talked a bit about site visits, but I think, there's still a lot of questions that are coming in about site visits. And I cannot stress enough, again, advanced preparation, right? Think about how you can do your testing, who should be engaged, and make sure that you're prepared. There could be limitations to the extent that you wouldn't feel comfortable performing your audits, right? So that's kind of going back to planning, which I didn't mention, but there is a possibility that you may realize that you have to be on site. And you cannot get around that, right? So we can't just say, I'm not going to perform this audit step because I can't use the technology efficiently to cover, so I'm just going to think about it when the times are better, right? No, we can't do that, right? So you still have responsibility to provide specific coverage, right? So you either have to make sure that there's an understanding of the limitations and what cannot be done, or there's a possibility of you going on site. And that, that needs to be coordinated, and you make sure you get all the right approvals, but maybe that's the way to go. Well, let's talk about the remote interviews. Depending on your company and on your culture and environment, your customers and yourselves, you may not be used to the video calls. I can speak from my example. We were not really much and really big on video calls in the past, pre-COVID. And then we adopted technology and slowly, and again, that would vary, right? Different people have different levels of comfort. People are kind of adapting to being on video calls, right? And if you can, encourage the video calls, because voice is one thing, but having some visual cues for your interviews is really helpful. This is going to be your next best thing after having in-person conversations. So the ability to see how people interact, how they act, the eye contact, anything else that potentially may raise some red flags for you, right? You really cannot pick up these cues on the voice calls. But you also want to make sure you use your time wisely, right? When you're on site, you can pop in and you can ask a question, you leave again, and then you may have a few more questions. So it's much easier to connect with people when you're on site. When you're remote, it still requires preparation and planning, and make sure you put a meeting on the calendar, and you're dealing with people who are busy. We have a lot of audit requests, so be prepared, right? Preparation. This is where you win your customers. This is how you have your efficient conversations and minimize that follow-up. And I think this is kind of a number one feedback item that, I'm hearing in some of our engagements, is that you guys have a lot of follow-up, right? Can we organize this? Can we have one conversation. Make sure you summarize everything you need, because it seems like there's a lot of different follow-up items coming from different people, and it could get frustrating, right? So again, we have to be very thoughtful in our approach, being virtual and being remote. Closing meetings, again, this whole planning, interviews, site visits, testing, this is all old stuff, right? None of this is new in a sense of structure and approach, except for considering the remote, right? Remote environment. So closing meetings in general, kind of the similar approach to in-person in terms of, having hopefully your testing done, your documentation is reviewed. Make sure, again, you organize your preliminary findings, or if you have preliminary report, whatever your organization is using. I know there's a big spread of what you're presenting. Some companies have reports, some companies don't have reports. So whatever it is you guys are doing at the end of your reviews, have a good draft of that, right? And have a good productive conversation during your closing meeting, so that, again, you have shown and demonstrated that A, you prepared, B, you really value the time of your audit customers, and C, you use that remote video conference call very wisely, and you're not wasting anybody's time. And I feel like with the remote and virtual, there is definitely less tolerance for being unprepared than when you're on site. I think that there is never excuse for being unprepared. However, virtual, it's even more visible if something like that happens. Something we've all been waiting for. What are the strategies, right? How do we tackle this remote audit thing, right? Is there a magic answer to to all of this change we have? What are the new priorities? How we evolve as audit leaders and internal audit teams. So some of the ways that you can stay on top of what's happening in your organizations, right, as in terms of compliance or any change in business, is really, check your business owners, stay in touch with your business owners, just have a regular conversations about what's happening in their area. How are things changing? And it should be a regular conversation. It shouldn't be a check the box, once a year, once in a blue moon. You have to really make an effort to stay connected when you're remote, right? You have to make an effort to reach out, be proactive, but also don't sound, too aggressive, right? Your purpose is to really learn, right? So make it clear that you are really just trying to understand what's happening in each business area, so that you can proactively think about what skill sets you need or how much time you need to allocate to cover certain areas. You can also identify certain areas you didn't even know about that may be worth covering, either from auditing or consulting type engagement perspective, right? And collaboration is the key. Again, we talked about, building relationship is one of the biggest challenges here. So here's one of the tools, right? You proactively reach out, you say what you have to offer, you listen, and circle back and really understand how you can really help that specific area, right? You may have some examples or some innovative ideas as to how you can help that specific business area be better, right? It could be something you've seen others do. It would be something from your own experience, but sharing your knowledge is really telling how internal audit is really value add, rather than just being check the box and somebody who is working remotely and doesn't really have a name or face associated with, right? Just kind of viewed as the cut and dry audit shop that nobody really wants to deal with. And again, the collaboration is the key here, right? Collaborate, right? Again, it's a partnership. It's something that is difficult to achieve remotely, and we have to really teach our younger team members on how to accomplish this, right? Again, for those of us who've been with organizations for a long time, have built the relationships prior to being remote, and we have advantage, right? People know who we are, we know who people are, so use that knowledge and really help your younger team members. And by younger, I mean, they could be new to organization. I know a lot of us hired people during the remote environment, so they didn't have the advantage of us who've been with organizations prior to. So share with them, who people are, what's the best way to reach out. And again, I think we've learned over the last couple of years what the preferences are in terms of communication, reaching out. So you should really share that with your team so that they're successful in building relationships. At the end of the day, whoever is your project lead or audit lead, they're going to be the ones who will have to build those relationships with the customers to have smoother audits, to have a call back and say, hey, I want you guys to come back and look into this area, right? Or I know you gave me some valuable information before. Can you take a look at this, right? Those are the types of requests, we really want to see as auditors, as audit leaders, right? That's what really speaks to the high quality of your audit talent and the result of the work that you provide that is really valued. Again, I think that's, not a surprise, but analytical and critical thinking, along with communication skills. So this is what is being requested and needed in internal audit profession. So internal audit leaders are really asking for these skills. And as a CE myself, I can definitely resonate with that message, right? It's very important. These are the skills you want to have. Technical skill you can teach and you can learn. Critical thinking is really, is much harder than telling somebody how to audit a control, right? Or perform a control or look at specific area. But connecting the dots, that analytical critical thinking, asking challenging questions, why is this done this way? Or why have we been looking at this area this way, right? Those are the skills you want to see. And communication. Communication remotely has been challenging for a lot of people, right? Because it's, especially if you don't have the visual, right? You have emails, you have phone calls, and you have to be very careful with how you craft your messages. How do you speak with your key stakeholders? What's the follow-up process? Do you know how they receive information better? Do you know what kind of communication they prefer? Is this email? Is this phone call? Is somebody really big on video, which more people are, again, adapting to, and helping also your less experienced auditors craft messages and explain what matters, right? And again, having less is more attitude, especially when you have a lot of emails and a lot of requests, really keeping the messages clear and very succinct so that your recipients don't have to read through a lot of long emails to understand what's being asked of them, but also being polite. We've seen a lot of short messages, not very nice. So you have to remember that, we're still all, humans, and we are appreciative of nice tones in your emails and your phone calls. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So I feel like communication is definitely something we've been always looking at and helping each other improve, right? If you have audit reports, have your peers read the reports. If you have important emails, have somebody else review it and make sure that the tone is good, or cold reader, right? Cold reader perspective, that your message makes sense to somebody who was not into the details and they really don't know what you've been doing day to day, but they can pick up your report and they can understand exactly what you're saying. So all of these are very important. So we're kind of down to our final takeaways, right? So some key action, how do we, at the end of the day, what do we need to do? What do we need to keep in mind as we move forward in this remote or hybrid environment? And again, it's likely that, we're going to be staying in this remote or hybrid environment. And the way things are going, it doesn't look like, at least in my experience, we're going to be changing back to full in-person probably ever, right? So as we move forward in our new internal audit world, things are things to consider, right? And we've summarized a few here for you guys, and hopefully they'll be helpful. And as we go through Q&A section next, we'll try to answer some more questions. But first of all, really, again, think about the competency gaps. If you haven't gotten a chance to look at that competency study that I mentioned, it is available on the IA website. I don't know if we have resource link here, but we can definitely share. If you can find it, I'm happy to provide. Read the report and just really read through what audit leaders are challenged with, what competencies, we've mentioned a few, but there's some more information that you can read so that you can understand better for yourself, for your organization, for your teams, what you should be focused on in terms of closing any sort of skill sets and competency gaps in the next 12 to 18 months. We talked a lot about the technology. So the digital technology strategy. And that applies to both, right? It applies to your organization, your business. What is business changing? What kind of technology they're adopting? And your internal audit strategy, right? Again, there's a lot of opportunities out there and a lot of different tools and software that could work for you, right? Again, it depends on the size of your audit shop. It could be big, it could be small, it could be global, it could be US. So there's a lot of different dimensions you have to consider, but you have to really evaluate what your technology needs are. And it's not always an easy sell, right? To your executive team and the audit committee, but you have to make a business case, right? And explain why is this critical and what's the return for you on that investment, right? Everybody needs to understand why. And you should ask yourself the same question, why do you need this technology? And I think a lot of organizations have been very responsive to approving some of these implementations. The other area is, we talked about this evolving, ongoing change, right? Think about new risks, new business changes. What does it mean to your organization? What does it mean to your internal audit plan? What does it mean to your skill sets? Again, talk about some of the high-risk areas that are not currently covered, right? And they may not be covered for multiple reasons, but it's important to have that open conversation with your executive team and the audit committees. If you identified risk areas or new areas that do require some audit coverage, you have to talk about what's needed to address, right? Are you running out of time? You don't have enough people? Do you not have additional resources that have that subject matter expertise? Again, going back to the competencies, do you need to hire people with certain expertise? Do you need to bring in subject matter expertise? And think about how to close those gaps, right? I don't really, I always say it's not a good answer to say I'm not going to look into this area because I don't have the right skill set, right? You have exposure that you believe that you need to cover, so that needs to be discussed and addressed, and explain that the risk is out there and it's currently unmitigated or unreviewed by internal audit. Can't ignore that. That has to be discussed for sure. And then think about the frequency of evaluating and which criteria, right? In terms of risk gaps or skill set gaps and anything else that could be relevant to your internal audit team or your organization. What does that gap assessment look like? What kind of elements are going to be included? Is your audit committee interested in seeing the results? Are you getting support from the top in terms of addressing some of these gaps? And so all of these tools can be helpful for you to move your audit function forward, right? To advance your skill set, to advance your technology needs. But there's a lot of actions on you, right? As a chief audit executive or manager or whatever your area responsibility is, you have to take the actions. So I want to thank everybody for listening, and hopefully it was helpful.